Okay, Ceci, I'm looking here at your interview guide, and I would remember to include a heading here at the top. So you may include the logo of the university, the name of the university, and any information about the teacher or the class. Any independent variables that you want to include here, I would include here at the top that you can just fill out before you conduct the interview. I'd like for you to look at all of these questions and think about questions that are more directed to what you observe in the classroom. Now, I understand that you still have not observed anything in the classroom, but you can anticipate perhaps some things that you might see based on your research questions. So think about questions and framing your questions, and even in the interview guide at this point, frame the questions as questions that are directed specifically to what you might observe. So, for example, you have this first question: how often do you use authentic materials in your class? So let's say that the teacher uses video, and the video that they're using is a TV series. You might ask the teacher, how often do you use this particular video? How often do you use a sitcom series in your class? Okay, that might be a question. But you're probably going to focus even still more on questions that when the teacher uses a video in their class, for example, you might ask, how did you plan and prepare to use that video in your class for your students? Or, I noticed that your students acted a certain way when you used this video in class. Did you plan for that? Did you anticipate that? Does that happen frequently? What were you reflecting at that point when that happened in your class? Now, again, I understand that you're not going to be able to, anticipate exactly what questions you're going to ask. But what I'd like to see at this point are questions of this type. Questions, so I know that you are going to be asking the right questions, because you really don't want to go into the interview asking general questions. Much like the questions you have now. You want to, again, ask very specific questions to what you observe, because the idea with the interview is to gain additional insight, additional information that complements what you observe, because as you know, when you observe classes, you can only see so much. Yeah, you really don't know what the teacher was thinking, how the teacher interpreted the same class, the same experience that you observed. So the interview allows you to gain that information. So all of the questions need to be very specific to what you see. And you can also frame follow-up questions that ask, well, does that always happen? Is that typical? And reference their prior experience. But it's all stemming from something that you have actually observed. So take a look at the interview guide again. I would add the heading and modify your questions. You probably won't need more than 3 or 4 questions, just to kind of give you a general idea of certain questions that you might ask. Now, obviously, after you observe the class, you're going to want to revisit your interview guide, take a look at it, and probably make changes. And that's fine. In fact, that's what I would anticipate you doing. But just remember that when you do make those modifications, that you always go back to your Google Drive document and make those changes too. So everything in the Google Drive document is updated. Having said that too, the procedure section, if there are changes at the moment when you are actually collecting the data, make sure you go back and update that information as well. If you do have any questions about this, or we need to discuss this further for additional clarification, just let me know. I do like what you have here with regard to the question words. I think that's good. And you might also include somewhere, perhaps here at the bottom, just the research questions directly as they're stated in your literature review, just to remind you before you begin the interview, again, what are the general questions, the general research questions that you are working with, so that you are more likely to address those specifically. Now, looking at your observation sheet, the procedure, I would either call it procedure or just description. Either way, but the idea is that you're describing everything that you see, as long as it's clear for you. Now, because you don't know how much space you're really going to need, and how many, in this case, stages, because you have stages here. I would just do this one time. I would write this out, and I wouldn't even write it as a box. I would do time, stage, and procedure. And that would be basically all I would write. I wouldn't put it in a box. I would leave it open like this. The time, you're only going to take up about, a little bit of space here. Maybe a couple of inches here of space. Same way with the stage. It's just going to be a word or phrase. So you're not going to have much information here. Here's where you're going to have lines of text from the procedure, or description as I call it, here at this point. And I would leave everything else blank. And I would have one sheet. Now, if you need more sheets, that's fine, and you're probably going to have various sheets. But as an instrument, as far as what you're going to attach as an appendix in your Google Drive document and present to the examiners, I would just include one sheet and just list it as time, stage, and procedure at the top here with no box, and leave the rest as blank space on your observation sheet. Also, I would add a header here, just the name of the university, La UA. I would include that information here, maybe the logo if you can find it, but at least the title of this university, maybe the language department, just to make it look a little bit more complete. And I think that's it. So let me know if you have any questions or need to discuss this any further, and try to upload this by today to your Google Drive.